Hi, I'm Arthur. This is awkward. So I made a joke last week about making a video about the Dark Mechanicum before I made a video about the Adeptus Mechanicus, which turns out is a lie, and I just forgot somehow that I made a video involving the Mechanicus months ago, so that's cool. Man, I am a professional. I can't even research my own channel. So as recompense, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics involving the Mechanicus. Like I'm jingling keys in front of you like an easily distracted baby who just wants to be pacified with random trivia that you can show to your friends. So, ooh, look at the keys, ooh! But, for real, in 40k, the Mechanicus is a faction I initially didn't like, grew to like, and I'm now kind of falling in love with right now. So, having read an increasing amount of stories involving them, I want to discuss a piece of information that doesn't get brought up a lot. And it probably is the most important piece of information that lies at the rotten core of the Mechanicus in general. And that is that the fundamentals of the entirety of their belief system is just kind of a lie. Like, this isn't a misunderstanding. The cult Mechanicus is built on a lie created by the Emperor, but we all knew that to some degree. The Emperor showed up to Mars to show himself to be the Omniscience, the ambassador of the machine god, in order to exploit their ability to create machines for his own purposes. But what if I told you it actually goes significantly deeper than that? What if I told you that the lie of the Great Mechanicus actually starts like a lot longer ago than just that, and is so woven into the fabric of their culture that it's almost never brought up, because to imply what this lie actually is insanity. Well, I'm gonna go into what I mean and what exactly this lie is. But before I do, I want to mention that if you didn't know, I actually have merch. I'm kind of shitty at promoting it. Like, for real, I'm terrible at it, but I got a bunch of incredibly talented artists to create some original art for this line, and I think it's all pretty great. It turned out okay, and a lot of the people who've been getting their shirts and their buttons have been telling me that it's of a pretty decently high quality. It would mean a lot to me if some of you were to pick up some of this. We've got buttons, we've got shirts, we've got hoodies, and we've got an art print that is pretty unique. Even if you're not that big a fan of me as a content creator, the print itself is just amazing to have to show your loyalty to either the Imperial Fists or the Iron Warriors. So it would really mean a lot if you grabbed some of that. We poured months of effort into revisions, brainstorming, and me educating them about everything, so it's as lore accurate as humanly possible for people who know nothing about Warhammer. So if you could pick up some of that, that would be fantastic, and it would all go to support this channel, which is super nice. So yeah, most people roughly know what the Adeptus Mechanicus is. They are a subfaction of the Imperium that resided initially on Mars and thus had spread out across the universe to create various fabrication-based planets in order to create technology for the Imperium. They are probably the most integral part of the Imperium's survival as a whole. Like, without them, Space Marines wouldn't have armor, Guardsmen wouldn't have guns, and Titans wouldn't even exist. So they are kind of important. They were originally a distinct faction that was more of a vassal of the Imperium than an actual extension of its will. But due to the schism on Mars, when the Dark Mechanicum broke off into a small faction, the reforming Mechanicum went under a new name as it was absorbed into the Imperium. They have a dogmatic view of technology, where what technology they have is going to be the technology they use. They cannot invent more than what they have, as progress is dangerous. This is a decree that came from the Emperor himself, which I feel was probably a rough means to an end in order to keep the Mechanicum in check, as the Great Lie of Mars is something that without that kind of law set in place, it would lead to unchecked rapid technological expansion, which, well, there are several factions in the game that show why that isn't a good idea, but I digress. So what if I told you that this whole religion was born from a lie that the Emperor himself implanted? Not just the Omnisci a bit, but the entirety of the Mechanicus exists because of a 3000 IQ psychopath-adjacent Sigma Bale Emperor plan that he did himself thousands of years ago. It would probably shake the foundations of the Imperium as a whole, wouldn't you agree? Well, that's so crazy you mention that, because it totally fucking happened. So, in the book Mechanicum, which seems to be the only time this is mentioned, so who knows, this might get retconned at some point, but in the book, in pretty plain text, it is laid out what this great lie is. Hidden away in the Noctis Labyrinthus is something I'm not sure I can explain properly, but the Void Dragon, or at least what we can understand as the Void Dragon, one of the Catan shards rests there, and it's pretty insanely powerful, even for Catan shards. It seems to be a level above what most people consider your typical shard. The description of the dragon itself defies logic, but we will get to that soon. In the book, several individuals of the Cult Mechanicum and just researchers from Terra show up to find out what this mystical dragon is, as one of the members, Dahlia Cythera, was having visions of the dragon and perspective shots of it in this eternal blackness, and heard of this place known as the Labyrinth of Night, which is the English way of saying Noctis Labyrinthus. The Noctis Labyrinthus is a small crater in a desolate place in Mars, where a few foundries have been attempted to be placed, but every time there is something there, the technology begins to act up. It goes haywire, and random errors are significantly more common. The further they go, the weirder it gets. There is an unearthly chill, the vehicles they were coming in on don't seem to work as well, and eventually they meet up with an individual by the name of Semyon. Semyon is just a human man who lives in the crater itself, and is a man who is described as 2 parts crazy and 1 part person. He is ageless. The cast of this merry band of misfits remarking that he could be anywhere between the age of 50 and 200, because everything in between seems just as likely. This is where he reveals that he is something that is referred to as the Guardian of the Dragon. With him is an ancient and massive battle servitor, and though a rather tense set of communications occurs, they ask him where the dragon is, not really knowing what it is, and through a little bit of coercion, he eventually takes them to it. So here is where things become a bit abstract. The room that he took them to was made out of what looked like a silver metal that was almost unnatural at first. Like it was man-made, but also naturally occurring to some degree. The issues start to pop up as someone's mind begins to take in the information of the room itself for too long. One of the party members collapses in that room and starts proclaiming that for some reason the room itself is impossible. The book does a bit of a shitty job at explaining this, but I like it in concept. So my understanding is that the room they are in does not occupy what could be considered regular space. The best way to identify it is that the room itself is sort of a 4-dimensional cube, or whatever the 4-dimensional extension of a cube is, because I mean the 2-dimensional extension of a cube is a square. So whatever we would call a 4th-dimensional cube, it's that, where every surface of the room itself is perceived from any single point of the room, even though it takes up a space that is navigatable. Navigable? One of those 2 words. But the room itself, so to put this in as understandable terms, because the writer was a bit fast and loose with this description and it was very plain, but imagine if you were in a room. You looked at the back wall of the room. The back wall of the room, you can see it, but also while you were looking at the back wall, your eyes could also take in every single other wall in the room. Your perception of the wall itself doesn't mean that you can't see every other portion of the room, meaning you could see the wall behind you, see the walls to your left, see the ceiling and the floor, but also the spaces in between are undefined. So they began to realize rather quickly that the room was both infinite and finite at the same time, with your mind having to take in all of the information of a space that is both infinite and finite, and you could see every single corner of the room while looking at one space. So that made no sense. But the book itself does an okay job at trying to explain this kind of concept where people are starting to realize that the fabric of reality is incredibly different in terms of its functionality in this one space. It's hard to take in that kind of information, and as this info is being poured into the minds of the party, some of them actually start to crack at the idea that this kind of space even exists, as it destroys their perception of how physical logic can occur. Like, imagine if you were a person who dedicated their entire existence to the study of physics, and you just found out that there was a core issue with everything you had studied that changes every single thing you have to know, meaning everything you learned is pointless, and you were staring at something that through your lens of perception cannot exist. It wasn't described as well as it could have been in the book, and I'm pretty sure I didn't describe it as well as I could have, but I think it does its job to make you understand that they're looking at something that does not functionally work in our perception of reality, as most of the party in that book ended up just shutting down, with the more logical individuals even passing out and dry heaving into seizures. One of them, the first person who ended up noticing this, ended up just jumping off a cliff and totally to a safe end at the bottom, but we never see them again, if you catch my drift. And this is because the individual who jumped off is someone who is firmly invested in real space as it's established. They believe that the world has core mechanics and rules that need to be abided by, so having that kind of sensibility be defiled by this impossible room basically meant that their entire perception of existence just didn't matter anymore, and they just wanted to, go somewhere else. Now, the people who in the room who were more philosophically inclined or more creative, prone to more bouts of imagination rather than cold logic, were able to take it in a little bit better just by closing their eyes and shutting out the insanity of the situation. In this room, which is the more important part of just the fact that it's an impossible room from like House of Leaves, but regardless, in the room itself, which is referred to as the Church of the Dragon, there is a book on a massive lectum that the main character of the party, Dahlia Cythera, is forced to view. And by forced, I mean they have to have all of the knowledge be brought into their mind. And this is when Dahlia learned what exactly the Great Lie of Mars is, and the fact that the Emperor lied about being the Omnissiah is only a small fraction of how messed up it actually gets. It's told in a bit of an abstract, almost metaphorical way, of a valiant knight attacking some ancient dragon, and instead of being able to kill it, the knight binds it and seals it away somewhere. But the interpretation and the way the novel continues, it makes it pretty apparent as to what the meaning is. So in as blunt a description as possible, now that you have all the context you need to kind of understand where this is coming from, the Great Lie of Mars that could actually probably destroy a lot of the Imperium, if not all of it, is that the largest shard of the Void Dragon, an ancient Catan shard that was subsisting off of the souls of people on Terra, exists on Mars. Though we never actually see the shards, so it could be a little bit different, because maybe it's just a more refined version of the Void Dragon, but I digress. This Void Dragon was defeated, but not destroyed by the Emperor, because as you know, you shouldn't kill a Catan or else bad shit happens. But in a bit of a moment of foresight, the Emperor buried the Void Dragon's corpse on Mars before space travel was even possible, and then, after thousands of years of development, found a way to influence people to live on Mars, with the knowledge in mind that the influence of the Void Dragon would cause the cult Mechanicus to arise and become one of the most dominant technological societies in the universe. He knew all that was going to happen, and thus seeded all of the information beforehand, so that when the time would come, he could show up as the Omnissiah for the religion that he created in order to have perfect manufacturers for all of his armies during the Great Crusade. This is the Great Lie of Mars. This piece of information is so significant and so important that there needs to be someone who watches over the Void Dragon's prison at all times. The Guardian of the Dragon, Simeon, and now Dahlia, contain a fragment of the Emperor's either power or soul, which gives them a fraction of his godly powers and near unlimited lifespan. Dahlia is allegedly still there. I don't think she's ever brought up again, though I could be wrong. She is the new Guardian and is there with her own little battle servitor to make sure that whatever that void dragon is, it stays asleep. So let's break this down a little. So for one, holy shit, this is kind of a big deal. This isn't a new thing, but this information is genuinely one of the biggest hypocrisies of the Emperor, of all of his hypocrisies. He has lied. He has done some pretty horrible shit that's pretty irredeemable most times, but this is literally going against every single piece of moral and ethical code just to gain the benefits of something. He literally seeded a religion, placing himself at the head of this as sort of a religious patriarch for his own political and militaristic gain. This is super antithetical to the imperial truth. This is the shit that the imperial truth is trying to fight, and he's preaching it. Literally, in the first book of the Horus Heresy, it opens with someone doing this exact same thing, and the sons of Horus murder him for it. Well, not the exact same thing, but you catch my drift. It's a bit of a big no-no, and it's one of those pieces of tropes that I think about a lot. See, in fiction, there is this common idea that with a big society, there's always a figurehead that has an, oh, if this secret gets out, I'm ruined type of trope. And a lot of the times they're kind of correct, but it's always something that in the back of my head I see it and I go, you could probably bounce back from this as long as you twist it properly. But if the Great Lie of Mars got out post-heresy, I don't see how the Emperor could even rule his kingdom anymore, or even how there'd be order. The Mechanicus would be seething. They would immediately fall into the trappings of Xenos tech, as the machine god that was placed into their minds is the empty, lightless dreams of an alien star god. This would deprive the Imperium of all their fabricators, and it would expose the Emperor as a massive hypocrite for banning religion, Xenos tech, Xenos influence from the Imperium, and just kind of a psychopath for planning ahead for so long just to implant himself as a figurehead in the religion he created. It's so interesting that this isn't discussed as much. At least on the wiki for the Guardian of the Dragon and Dahlia Sithra, there isn't any other citation other than the one book, the Mechanicum. Though I suppose for Simeon, there is one more mention in another book, but it's just bringing him up as a revolutionary tech priest and that's it. And alongside that, the interior of the Noctis Labyrinthus, another interesting part, is described as the dragon itself. Like, they keep using the terminology that the dragon is both the dragon and it's prisoned at the same time, which is kind of hard to parse, but when you're dealing with impossible geometry, I don't know how to understand these things. I don't fully understand this, as even for traditional Catan shards, there's a degree of freedom they can express, which is why I tend to think the Void Dragon under Mars is something different. Like, what if it's a fragment of the Void Dragon, not sealed in a shard like the other Catan were, but like, what if it's something new, something different? Well, not new, but like something that we haven't seen before, something that the Emperor might have made himself and sealed away. I think that could be interesting, though it's most likely just a very, very powerful shard of the Void Dragon. At least it's the easiest interpretation to understand with my non-4D chess-playing brain. As weird as it is, I kind of get why the Emperor did it. Like, you see shit coming over the horizon. You see chaos, you see the Eldar, you see Necron. You need to arm yourself and you need to get the tech in order to combat it. And in order to do that at a more rapid pace that would be able to have everybody, survive, you have to do some shady shit. It's morally gray as a choice, and it really depends on who you are, what your perspective on the matter is. For the Imperium, it's kind of a necessity for their own existence. The Imperium needs the Mechanicum to exist. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I think it's definitely up to your interpretation as an individual. So I'll leave it in your guys' hands. What do you think about the Great Lie? Was it necessary? Was it a deplorable act? Or was it just another example as to why the Emperor is the single most important character in the setting of Warhammer 40k? Let me know in the comments. I do want to go in depth more about the Catan shards in the future because I love the idea of these eldritch abominations, but I want to save that for another time. Alongside that, as per the usual, I need to thank my channel members for supporting me. With your help, I am able to make this content and support myself. Without you, I wouldn't be able to do this at all. So thank you. And if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks once again for watching, and until next time, always remember, never, ever, ever go into the Noctis Labyrinthus. Ever.